You know, I think what intimidates people from trying topiary themselves is that they think they have to have a very specific kind of plant or shrub to create a topiary, and that very much is not true. I will topiary practically anything. Now, what we historically and traditionally think of as material for making good topiary is basically anything that is small-leaved and that grows. In some cases, we want it to grow moderately slowly. In other cases, we want it to grow moderately fast. But that's why things like this myrtle and boxwood, the common boxwood, are so popular as medium for topiary. But again, look outside the box. I literally often go out into my own yard and just dig up things to create topiary. Now, this is a very, very specific example of that. This is just a blue point juniper that was planted by the birds. I just noticed it in the garden bed when I was weeding. I dug it up. I identified the fact that it had a very, very strong central stem, and I could probably kind of conceive and visualize it in some kind of topiary form. I'm trying to decide right now if I want that to be a strong conical form like a Christmas tree shape, or a standard form of just a ball on the stem. Now, speaking of just a globe on a stem, this is a tiny leaved, I think it's called a time-leaved cotoneaster, but a regular kind of cotoneaster that you could find in any garden nursery would probably make a good candidate for a topiary. These are also two little blue point junipers that the birds planted that I dug up. I'm going to make a little mini hedge out of that. I especially like those at Christmas time. Other plants that we think of as making very good medium for topiary are almost any kind of herbs, particularly fragrant herbs. We often see rosemary in a topiary form. This one is kind of a wild tree shape. Often we find these in nurseries and garden centers around Christmas, which for me, ironically, is not necessarily when I want to find topiary, because that means if we're not in a climate that's temperate, we have to bring those rosemaries inside and we have to overwinter them in a greenhouse or indoors. And I typically like to display my topiaries outside and then bring them in on occasion for whatever kind of entertaining I'm doing or for seasonal display. The other thing about finding them at your local nursery or at your local florist is oftentimes when you get them, they will be extremely pot bound. And I'll demonstrate what you need to do about that a little bit later, but it's something to be mindful of, and one of the reasons you might want to grow your own versus buying them already pre-made. Here is an example of a boxwood ball. I think this is a baby gem that already kind of had that natural form to it, and I turned it into a little boxwood globe. The other thing that you'll find about topiary, and I'll show this to a greater extent later, is that you often find them displayed in moss. I think I don't know why that is, but we find them very appealing in abundance, either all of the same kind of topiary or a mixture of different kinds of topiary. Here's an example of growing a very easy plant on a very simple wreath form. This is just something called angel vine plant, or also called wire vine. It's Muhlenbeckia, and I've just trained it around this circular wreath form. Here's another example of something that you can just dig up out of your own yard. This one, I probably need to stake it. This is a cherry laurel, I believe, because it was just growing as a volunteer in my landscape. Again, the birds planted it. It had a good, straight, strong stem. I dug it up, I planted it, and it now has a little sibling, a tiny little sibling that I am training into that same standard form. Other common, very inexpensive plants that you can find are not to be overlooked. I have used both large and small-leaved euonymus. You can usually find things like coleus or lavender or other kinds of herbs that you can then train into a topiary form. They're easy to find in the springtime, so be on the lookout for those. I especially like plants that have fragrance to them. It's one of the reasons I love lavender and rosemary, and especially this lemon cypress that you can find around the holidays. Now, one of the reasons I have so much topiary is because of the way that they're grown and the fact that they can dry out and that you have to bring some of them indoors because I don't have a greenhouse in the winter time, is that they can die on you. And that happens, and it's happened to me. And I give myself permission, and I give you permission for the plants to die, because you can always make another one. I try to be a good mama, but on occasion they just give it up for whatever reason. Some I have had for years and years. Other ones I enjoy for a season, just like a bouquet of cut flowers. And when they're done, and I relegate them to the compost pile. So that's kind of an assortment of some of the different varieties of plants that I use for topiary. I'll do a little garden tour later and show you some of the bigger specimens in bigger pots and plantings that I have scattered around my yard.